All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for this session on net zero technologies. And with those two words, net zero, we are already going to start a controversy on this panel. But before we get there are about 30 sessions, I'm told, on energy and climate at Davos this week. And so to make sure that we stay focused, I want this to be a session that is very much about the future. So I want us to do a little bit of a thought experiment. I'm going to ask everybody here, not just the panelists, but all of you as well, to close your eyes for just 1 minute and imagine that it is the year 2050 and we have reached zero emissions. We're living in paradise. We've done it. We've achieved the climate goal. What are the technologies that you think we have when you look around you? What is it exists in the world that allows us to be in this magical place? All right, so you've got your own ideas. I'm sure they've come to your mind. We're going to ask the panelists, what are the things that will get us to this nirvana? But first of all, let me ask a question. Zero or net zero? Who wants to go first? Andrew.
Well, I'm happy to speak. Look, as a scientist, I look very hard at all the systems which I've seen emerge in order to capture carbon. And I can assure you that about 80% of them are on the edge of fraudulent. Even those signed off by scientific bodies, I can give you a very reputable scientific body in Australia who has signed off that you can burn this massive part of Australia. It's bigger than most countries in Europe by several times. It's wilderness, and it has survived beautifully for geological time as a wilderness. Yet now it's okay to burn it. It's okay to reduce it to grasslands because the theory goes that if you artificially burn it by dropping incendiary bombs out of an aeroplane, that you lose less carbon, you lose less wildlife than if a wildfire went through a hot fire, as they call it. So the difference between burning it off and nature, they argue, is a carbon credit. And people are making a truckload of money out of destroying what's known as the Kimberleys, one of the last great wildernesses. Now, I just look at this disgrace and all the trees getting planted where, if you left nature alone, they'd grow happily anyway, and understand where the word net came from. It came from the only way we could get a 2050 target. It was a massive give to the fossil fuel sector to get them to not go full ambush against everything anyone would ever do for climate change. The fact is, they're still going full ambush, but now they are talking at some of the politer dinners I go to, not in public, about net zero barrel of oil by 2050. It means no change at all. So I'd argue we don't have to have emissions. We don't have to have plastic waste. It's a very valuable commodity. We don't have to pump all that carbon into the atmosphere. You can actually use that. What we need is technology which is right on the table now, which just eliminates emissions. It's solar, wind, it's batteries, it's green hydrogen. No one can argue that. No physicist, no scientist, no biologist, no ecologist, and certainly no businessman and politician can argue it. We do not have to have emissions.
Thank you.
I want to put that out there. Real zero, not net zero.
Thank you. So by doing that, you have set the stakes for this panel and for the discussion for the world, which is great. I love it. And so now what I'm going to ask each of you to do is talk about what the things that you're working on specifically, or the things you're not working on that you think we need to see in order to reach that goal of actual zero emissions by 2050. And I'm going to start with Linnéa. You work on a company that does logistics, trucking solutions that are electric and autonomous. Your company, Einride, is trying to build self-driving trucks, among other things. So for you, what does the world look like in 2050 in all of your dreams are met? And I'm not asking you to say yet how the dreams will be met, but what is it that you're striving towards?
So what we're our vision and why we started the company was that we wanted to be part of reducing the 7 to 8% of the global CO2 emissions that comes from heavy road freight. And in 2050, we're hoping that we're closing in on that goal. And what we really truly believe and what we saw during the pandemic is that the transport system is not really resilient and it's not really as stable as we would like it to be. And so what we're hoping for is to build up a new infrastructure and a new way of how to make transportation take the next phase or building for the next 100 years at least, if not further. And so what we're seeing in our vision is that we want to see electric and autonomous trucks serving society in the most resilient and sustainable way possible.
Great, thank you. So, Lei Zhang, Envision is the company that you lead, and it invests or works on developing a whole range of technologies. We're talking about things like wind power, we're talking about things like batteries, green hydrogen. So what is your vision of how all of these things pan out?
Right. So, back to this 2050 visions, from my point of view, so today, the most of technology by then is ready. So next 30 years is about scaling up industrializations. Think about the first industrialization, which is actually starting with the energy revolution. So the steam engine is the vehicle to actually convert the fossil fuel to energy, to the power. Now, what we need is the new steam engine, the green steam engine. Think about it. What's the green steam engine? Solar panel, which are converting renewable solar to power. Wind turbine, green steam engine. Hydrogen is about harnessing the green energy into other wave usage. Batteries store the renewable energies. So think about it takes about 40 years to industrialize wind turbines. 20 years for solar panel. Now, we only have 30 years to left. How are we able to make hydrogen to be scalable within 5 to 10 years? How are we able to make battery to scalable even short period? So, the first industrialization to steam engine, it takes about 100 years to pour all over the world. Now, we actually have this technology ready. It's about scalability, industrialization. And one thing very important I want to point out is the system knowledge, system technology. Because if you see today's technology company, they're very siloed. Someone just focus on making solar panel, someone making wind turbines, someone making batteries. That actually, we need someone is able to working out the renewable energy system, to combining this technology together, to turn them into an integrated renewable energy system, which actually can serve your customer, actually to be a modern utility, a renewable utility. This type of things, the system knowledge, actually Envision is doing, is a net zero industrial park. We realize the grid company is not supportive to actually to be able to supply 100% renewable energy because they have constraints. But if we are able to build in this renewable energy resource plentiful place to combining wind, solar, storage, hydrogen, using digital solution to providing 100% renewable energy. That's actually like Andrew said, we're starting with zero. Mm-hmm. We're starting with zero energy to power the industrials. So what we see, so this kind of system technology is very important.
Right, good. So we have electric and autonomous trucks. We have an industrial park that is based on producing clean energy and storing it safely and using green hydrogen. And we need a green hydrogen-powered steam engine. All right, we'll talk about the details of how we get to these things. Andrew, I want to come to you next because you, in 2020, your company Fortescue started Fortescue Future Technologies, where you're investing in a lot of in developing a lot of the things that Lei talked about. But you're a mining company, you're one of the world's biggest iron ore producers, you work on some other metals as well. So obviously mining is very energy intensive. What is the vision of how you get that to be a zero emissions business?
So in everything we do, we start where we intend to finish. That's what we've always done at Fortescue. If we have an initiative, we think of what is the end point? What do we imagine? A lot like how you've called this very meeting. You know, imagine where you want to be, and sure, it's just a dream, maybe a vision, but then keep on imagining the steps you need from there to today's meeting. As you do that, you'll see you've got a great deal of steps which you can't determine, but as you've done that, you've also created a strategy. You know your weak points, you know your strengths, and you basically know the challenges to achieve that goal. So we did that. Elizabeth Gaines, the chief executive where this was all pioneered under, is with us right here. And we sat down and we imagined by 2050, if not early, in fact, we gave ourselves 2040, that the world would be peaceful, quiet, clean, totally sustainable, zero pollution, democratic world. Now, a lot of that swings on the ditherers represented by countries in Davos who are wondering about how we appease Putin. I'm just saying bluntly, can we not worry about Putin's career? I mean, he needs no career advice, not going to take it anyway. Let's just win this war. You win this war, the president of Ukraine and I have got a pact that he will replace all that horrible old Soviet infrastructure with the Ukrainians paid for. They just had these rotten Soviet designs and get rid of that Soviet hierarchy and oligarchy, and they would lead Europe into a green digital economy, zero emissions. And so I feel we're on the path. I think we're close to defeating Russia. It might take another year or two, but all the countries I'm speaking to now, in particular Germany, are finally beginning to step up and thinking, well, let's stop worrying about what Putin's going to do. Let's just worry about what we must do.
All right, but I'm starting with a more basic question, which is how do you do mining at scale without emissions?
Well, there's a lot of people's bonuses. Let's start right there. The executive leadership of the Fortescue bonuses is sitting right on zero emissions by 2030. And we're a huge industrial company. And we're part of the laggard sector of the world. The common knowledge that the mining industry will be the last to move. Well, actually, no. We've already invented train engines, which we're working with Germany on because they need them too, pioneered by us, which are zero emission train engines. They burn ammonia. Massive batteries now which capture all the gravitational energy as a train goes down a hill to use to get back up the hill. We have zero emissions trucks. I went to all the big suppliers. They said, oh, Forrest, 2035 earliest, if we feel like it by then. I said, well, I'm just going to start myself, mate. I'm going to make my own truck engines. Now, we have hundreds of these trucks on their way, all zero emissions. Our power stations will be powered by wind, solar, pumped hydro and hydrogen, all zero emissions. So my entire company has pegged itself on this. And before anyone says, well, okay, we thought you were laggard, but now you're running first and therefore it must be unique. You might have unique circumstances. That's not true. You need belief you can do it first, then leadership, then action, then collaboration. And take a company that's widely different to ours as you can get. Let's just choose Amazon, Elizabeth. Totally different, huge tech distribution company. We went through with the chief executive of Amazon every challenge he had to turn his company green, and they're exactly the challenges we have as a huge mining company. So we said, let's work together.
Right. Stefano, all right, so your company, Newcleo, works on fourth generation nuclear reactors. So tell us a bit, just basically what those are and what role you see nuclear energy playing in the energy mix in 2050.
Well, nuclear energy will play a relevant role, finally, because nuclear energy has been essentially discovered 80 years ago, and we have a lot of experience on nuclear energy. But it has also been demonized 50 years ago for different reasons that I don't need to touch now. But research has remained, and today there is a clear need of an energy that is not driven by cost, but is driven by sustainability. And nuclear can be very sustainable. We are building modern reactors that make use of the waste of the older reactors. This is a very important concept that is important for the nuclear energy of the future, the fact of closing the fuel cycle. That is a concept contained in the EU Green Taxonomy to qualify a new reactor as green. The fact that you can reuse the waste of your reactors multiple times, meaning that you essentially don't need even to mine for the next few thousands of years if you use all of the waste that has been created so far. It's a clear opportunity, and is an existing opportunity. We are just capitalizing on a lot of know-how that exists and need to be transformed into an industry. So I see a really bright future. If the fears of nuclear disappears in the population, and there are reasons to disappear, because it is really a sustainable form of energy, we will open many possibilities, because small reactors can be so small and act like nuclear batteries that can be deployed also in transportation, for example, in many industrial applications. So there is a potential. I even see nuclear batteries for cars being start to be developed. And it's not a dream, because it has been developed in the 50s for the space travels. So, I mean, there is now the opportunity to bring this technology really on, to serve the planet.
Right. Okay, I have questions for you about the nuclear-powered car, but we will come back to those. I want to come back. So now I want to talk about some of the technological obstacles to getting to where we're going. So one of the key ones seems to me to be batteries. Obviously, these electric trucks will need batteries. A lot of the vehicles that you're using in mining will need batteries. Grid storage will need batteries, because if you're relying on renewable power, it fluctuates and you need to be able to have a steady supply. I heard a statistic yesterday from somebody that said that in order to satisfy the battery needs of 2050, capacity of lithium-ion batteries, assuming we still are using them, would need to grow by about 40 times from what it is today. So how do we, and there's a lot of lithium in the world, but a lot of it is really hard to mine. So how do we get that? Who wants to go first?
Yeah, probably. So, Envision today, we are building 12 gigafactory around the world. And
like the Tesla Gigafactory, but
yeah, for batteries.
For batteries,
so
yes.
the total adding up volume is around 500 gigawatt hour a year. So we definitely we need lots of raw materials. But if we think about another battery, which is a very old conventional lead acid battery. So in the Earth, the reserve of lead is not sufficient to power all the lead acid battery. But what do? We actually recycle almost 100% the lead. So which make the lead acid battery sector actually is functioning very well. So end of the day, so I think because now we still have the new growth, but by 2030 sometime, so we are able to recycle all the, because we retire the cars. So then we come to a very comfortable, feedback loop. But before 2030, indeed, especially for precious, especially for the nickel and the lithium, there's some bottleneck. The reason the price increase is due to the tightening supply chain for nickel and lithium. But we see recent trends for last a few months. The price start to soften. So because the new capacity is going to be built up. So I'm quite, confident. So this price for storage, for EV battery, will come down fast. Because if you look at the history of solar panel, solar silicons. You know, it used to be like $100, $200 a kilogram, yeah? So, but now it's maybe 1/10. So this is about industrializing refineries, lithium, nickels. The volume is actually there, reserve is there.
And maybe I can continue. So on the other part, when you start to deploy battery technology, electric technology, there's other things to take into account. And what we're seeing in our business is, for example, that the average filling rate for a truck today is 25%. So there's so much waste, and the utilization is also somewhere around 20-25%. And so there's also so much waste going into this. And this is something that you can actually solve by going digital in this industry. And so something that we found now when we start rolling out this technology and the scarcity that will be on the resources is that you also need to find a good way of where to deploy the technology. So in Sweden, where we are operating, we always do we analyze our customers' needs and their demand and where they're going. And what we've seen from that is that when going electric in Sweden, there's always a better case than actually continue with fossil fuel. While that is not the case in the whole world, and it's going to be different from different countries. But that's something that's very important now when we start rolling out, that it has to make business sense, it has to be cost competitive, but it also has to be sustainable. And it's not necessarily sustainable, and that's something that I think is going to be the main challenge and the main task for us moving forward is how do we find those applications to deploy this technology first, and where do we continue to build out the infrastructure?
Yes. Andrew, since you are in mining, what do you think about what Lei is saying about the recycling of lithium, or do we need to find more lithium supplies?
Look, I think you can absolutely do both, but I think the mistake is the word lithium. It is just one of the mediums out there for major fixed energy storage. It's useless. I mean, iron is so much better. There's new technologies emerging which store energy much better than lithium, which has no lithium in it. I'm just not free to talk about it right now. Well, there's little secrecy declarations people like me have to sign. But it's a combination of two common elements. And these are abundant. You know, I've looked very carefully at the demand for one of the elements. It's used in steel making. It has around 10 times supply to what is being used in demand. We use these for batteries. It will go into deficit very quickly for a couple of years. Then people like us and the rest of the industry will crank up and invest, and it'll go back into surplus because there's stacks of it. So I'm a person who says categorically, you do not have to mine the jungles of Ecuador. You do not have to use the digital energy revolution to justify deep sea mining. There's abundant materials where you can mine on a purely sustainable basis, where after the mining is concluded, you can't really tell there's been a mine there.
Right. I want to talk about green hydrogen as well, because a couple of you brought that up. This is something where, you know, whether it's green hydrogen, whether it's ammonia, maybe there are other liquid fuels, but these are things that clearly a lot of people think we are going to have to develop at large scale in order to replace fossil fuels. But right now, these are very tiny markets, and the production facilities required to make this stuff are going to be gigantic. Maybe starting again with Lei, what do you think are the obstacles to getting that up to scale?
Very good questions, because Envision is building the largest green hydrogen and green ammonia project, which is before 2025. The phase 1 is commissioned in like 3 or 4 months later, this year, middle of this year. And the total before 2025, we are going to produce 1.5 million ton green ammonia a year. So the cost we are able to set around $500 a ton, which is today's even gray ammonia price in Europe is around $800 or even $10,000 a ton, which is great. But this is green, the cost. Maybe we add some premium on that. But the problem is, the challenge we have found, because we are the real doers, we found is the ammonia market is a very niche market. It could be the new oil, become the new oil. Before it become the new oil market, it's very niche, it's a chemical product. So the buyers normally signing a short-term contract, year contract, 2 years contract. But in order to financing your green ammonia, green hydrogen facility, you need a long-term offtake contract. But the user, they not like to take a risk because, okay, now is $800, it could come down $200, $300. Why I sign $500 or $600 with you with a long-term contract? But we know the fossil fuel price will keep continuously to drive the ammonia, which is coming from coal or gas, will stay high. But there's no such a market or mechanism. So what do we think is we need to introduce the de-risking method, which again need support from government. The role of government should really step into the de-risking. Think about this North Sea offshore wind in the UK. Government set up this contract for difference, which is really guarantee long-term offtake of offshore wind energy, which is really actually developed offshore wind. And think about the renewable energy law in Germany back 22 years ago. So again, so it's give you the energy, it give the developer the right to send 100% to the grid at grid price. Today, for the green ammonia, we need such a contract for difference or long-term off contract, which could be enhanced credit enhancement from government or this contract set by government. So this de-risking is very important to support. Then you are able to make the technology project to become infrastructure project. Before it becomes the infrastructure project, this technology cannot be scaled up.
Yes. Okay, well, since we've brought up the question of de-risking, let's start talking about policy obstacles to getting some of these technologies implemented. And Stefano, let's start with you, because nuclear is such a sensitive topic still in many countries. What do you think needs to happen to change both the public perception and regulatory perception in order to make nuclear power more acceptable to people?
Well, certainly there is a lot of education to be done. The fact that people is against nuclear is because there has not been a truly explanation of the potential of nuclear. You were, and what is on stake, you were using a gigantic, and these gigantic projects are true. They needed to be there because we need a lot of electrical power. But nuclear has a concentrated possibility to make electricity. 1 million times less material is involved into nuclear. Imagine that a nuclear power plant of 1 gigawatt electric can, in a closed fuel cycle, produce only 900 kilograms in 1 year of fission fragments. So less than a cubic meter of waste. So imagine how much electricity you can produce with nuclear. So I think nothing has to be changed at the level of regulatory because we need to comply. We have a heavy regulated market, and we need to ensure that these machines are safe for the operation, for the population. So I wouldn't say we have to change much but we have to change more the acceptance of the public, and only through the education this is possible.
All right, but then how would you get the public to accept the idea of a nuclear-powered car, say? In other words, if I'm thinking, great, I love the idea of a reactor in the back of my car, but what happens if I'm involved in a high-speed crash and fragments go everywhere, I've contaminated half the landscape? So how do you get the public used to the idea that this is actually safe?
It is a long process. That's why I was talking about what's happening in 2050. I think nuclear will be more and more accepted. Let's make an example. I make a lot of nuclear medicine in the past. There is a boom in nuclear medicine, and I see tens of drugs curing cancer in 2050 because so many drugs are being developed today. So nuclear will be, a solution in that case, for example. So it is a question really of time, and a young generation that don't have the narrative of the older nuclear. They can really start from a new point. Is the generation that now is questioning about why nuclear hasn't been used in the past. So they are really can start a new vision on nuclear.
Right. But I mean, actually specifically on if you're imagining lots of very small reactors, whether they're in cars or in houses, or at any rate, there's the problems of safety, of maybe an explosion or a crash.
Yeah.
There's a problem of proliferation.
What are
the answers here?
Today we can design nuclear systems that are passively safe. So we can forget about accidents because the nature intervenes. I was a little bit exaggerating with the nuclear batteries into the cars, but there is a company who's developing that. So it's not science fiction, it is a reality. We are developing batteries that are for big ships. These are essentially devices that can produce 30 megawatt electric for 15 years. That's why I say batteries, because they don't need to be touched, essentially. But in case of an accident, in case of a sinking of this boat, essentially the way the battery is designed is that it will freeze, is a recipient of 3 meters by 5 full of lead. It will freeze, and the nuclear activity that is inside will be frozen into this container of lead. So there are ways to design nuclear system completely and passively safe. And there are since many years, but we didn't have the time to realize these industrial novelties. Now is the time. Now there are a lot of companies that are indeed have a lot of designs that are safe. We need time.
Yeah.
We need time. It's not a solution for the next 10 years, but in between 2030 and 2050, we will see an escalation of this kind of new system that will be much more sustainable.
Yeah. Continuing with the policy questions. So, Andrew, what do you think are the policy obstacles or the incentives required to get more of the mining industry to make this transition to zero emissions?
Well, I don't think we should think about the mining industry. I think we should think about the shipping industry, the transport industry, every flipping industry. Because as the analogy I drew between Amazon and Fortescue, they're having all the same problems. What we're running into is just a lack of belief we can make change, and then with that lack of belief is clearly then the excuse to have no leadership. So first we've got to believe we can do it, because I know we can. Secondly, if I could just challenge you, you say the markets are really small. The production markets are really small. We will go to FID for 5 projects this year. We'll be in production a year before we told the market next year. We have a 2 gigawatt factory of green electrolyzers that'll be starting in a few months. We have a very large battery facility from Williams Advanced Engineering, which will start in April. I mean, all of this is rolling, and it's been completely triggered by the Inflation Reduction Act. And I've met so many British and European politicians, and to be brutal, they're all whinging about it. They're saying, well, it makes America unnecessarily unfair, and it gives them an edge, and what about trade between the two of us? That's all completely fine. It totally reminds me of discussion, which I've had a few here in Davos, where everyone's looking pragmatically and economically about energy, and the elephant in the room is climate change, which doesn't get talked about. Actually, we need not to bicker about what America's done, but to have Europe get up and do the same thing, to have the large Asian economies to do the same thing. If we don't have these great macro shifts of policy, your world is cooked. I'm a marine ecologist. I've done the science. Just thank God the rest of the world is seeing that you're going to need grass skis soon here in Switzerland, that you could walk across rivers which you've never been able to stop flowing in geological history. Thank God the public is seeing the lies of the fossil fuel sector. This planet is cooking. So we actually don't want to be tearing down a really good policy. It appeased oil and gas. It appeased nuclear, but it did put a $3 subsidy onto green hydrogen, and it did say, if you're in that ecosystem, we'll refund you 50% of your capital. We want you to get going. And if you put the ecosystem of manufacturing in these poverty-stricken areas of North American old industry, then we might even fund you more, 50, 60, 70%. Now, before that bill, we had no projects in North America. Didn't come through long ago. We have 4 now. And they're of the scale of our mining ventures. Our mining ventures are really big. So, you know, it's policy to just get on and make change. And, you know, I was involved in the early stages of the IRA, and it just took a few sketches on the back of an envelope to show senators that if they spent $500 billion, I think they put about 430, but there's no lid on it, right? So let's not forget that. It could just, if they like the investment, will keep going. That if they do this, they're going to pay it back in about 3 or 4 years. Those senators, penny dropped. Oh my God, we should do this. It's a great investment for our taxpayer. So I'm saying to Europe and other countries, don't whinge and crybaby about the fact America went first. Praise them, say thank God for America, get on after them, because your market you're trying to change isn't them, it's the fossil fuel sector. That multi-trillion-dollar fossil fuel sector, that's your market, that's what you've got to change. Don't think you're going to wish it into existence. You've got to have good policy, then you'll get it into existence.
Linnéa, do you feel the need for similar kind of legislation in Europe or in Sweden specifically? Do you see it coming along?
Yeah, I mean, basically, can't
For
European...
Linnéa. I was going to ask Linnéa that question.
Well, I just think somebody's argued with Europe for ages. Right now, if you make electricity on a grid to make green hydrogen, it's not green. Well, that's just going to kill every developing African country to ever market Europe.
What we will start seeing in the next couple of years is that the transport sector and the energy sector will come much more together. And the great thing with working with freight is that it's very predictable. It's actually pretty boring in a sense, because you know exactly where you're going. 80% of the market is like that. But the great thing with that is that it's very easy to start planning for efficiency, and it's very easy to start planning for how to go electric in the most efficient way. And I think what we will start seeing is that when we have these bigger electric heavy-duty trucks, is that they're actually almost becoming like batteries on wheels. And I think that's something that we're going to need policymakers and the private sector to come together and to look into how can these big batteries on wheels not only take from the grid, but also give back to the grid, and so that we can get a better distribution of electricity over the parts of the world. And so I think that's something that we will start seeing more in the next coming years, and where we really need to come together and where we need to work with policymakers and to see how we can do this in a good way. But that has to start with demand. It has to start with where do we see a lot of demand today to ship from A to B.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
When you're representing a really big, important industry, but I've only heard you speak about batteries, not hydrogen. I mean, I drove here in a Toyota hydrogen car. It performed just like a normal car. You're not thinking about that?
I think there will be applications for hydrogen where it could be suitable. The problem with hydrogen is it's very explosive. And so when you're starting producing thousands and thousands of heavy-duty electric trucks, you will have that one, misconstructed truck, and that will, blow out almost a whole block. And so what we're seeing is that we can get there, but we truly believe that the future for heavy-duty electric will be electric, and it will be based on batteries.
Okay, can I also, Bill Gates said the same
Sure,
thing.
why not?
Right, so, but it was COP26, surrounded by acolytes of Bill's, and the president walked in, the United States, and he said, I wouldn't use hydrogen, it's explosive. I said, well, let's see what happens, Bill, if we put a missile through a petrol car, or gasoline car, or hydrogen car. Which one's going to blow up? I said, well, the hydrogen car, of course, is no. What happens with fuel is that it's heavier than air, it sinks, creates a massive ignition source. Put a missile through a hydrogen car, truck, whatever you like, it goes up at the rate of 50 metres per second. So it immediately extinguishes its ignition source. So we don't have that same kind of concern, but we recognise the Hindenburg and all these other rumours have been around. So I think let's get our scientists together to talk about that.
Yes,
I think what you need to do is a YouTube video, fire some rockets into hydrogen car, gas car, and show it, and then that will convince people. People will believe the evidence of their eyes.
It's called a missile test.
So,
But I think the fundamental is that we need to start now.
Yeah.
Like, we can't wait. And we know that battery technology is already better than the alternatives that we have today. And if we'll see other alternatives coming in the future that we can, that's safe and that we know is working, there's no prestige in changing that. Then we need to change. But we need to take that step-by-step approach. And what I've been very happy about spending these days here is that you're hearing action. You're not hearing people continue to stating the problems and disagreeing on what the solution is. We're actually talking about solutions and we're talking about taking action. So
Great.
I think we'll see what the future holds.
Yeah.
since we're coming up at the end of the session, I always like to close with asking about what are the opportunities for other people who want to get involved in a sector, in making a difference. So maybe each of you can very briefly talk about where you see an opportunity for somebody who is either in one of your industries already, but wants to do more, or wants to get into one of these industries, or work on a technology. Stefano, shall we start with you?
Well, in my field, there has been an extreme gap between the know-how that has been created many years ago and what we have today. So there is huge opportunities. I see every nuclear companies really trying to hire as many people as possible. Ourselves, we are hiring a lot of young people, and we are using people that is already retired because there is this incredible gap from the 70s where the project have been really done and created until now, where we restart to redesign nuclear systems. So concerning our industry, is a real opportunity for young generation to be involved in the technology of the future.
Yes, thank you. Andrew, brief
Look,
thought from you.
quite simply, green hydrogen will be the biggest industry in the world. If it's not fossil fuel, will be, and it'll be a theoretical discussion about future employment for kids, because there probably won't be much of a world for them to be employed into. So I think that it's a tremendously exciting space. If I was at school or uni these days, I'd be directing my studies towards anything green, because it simply has to be, therefore will be, the biggest industry in the world.
Great, thank you. Linnéa, since you saw an opportunity and started a company.
Yes, absolutely. I think there's a lot of different ways you can make an impact on today, and I think that we have a lot of challenges, as we're all aware of. What we've been talking today about is all emerging technologies, and we're just in the starting phase in many of it. And so what I believe that we're in the biggest technological shift for at least 100 years. So I think it's very exciting times to be alive, challenging, but very exciting as well. And I think we will look back on this years and say that, wow, we had no idea what we were doing. But we are really, taking, the good thing is that we're in a group, we're in the world now where we want to take a joint responsibility to make something better for the future and for the next generation. And that's something that I'm very hopeful about.
All right, and Leia, the last word goes to you.
Right. So this net zero transition is not only about energy revolution. So if you look at the history, every time the energy revolution is going to lead the industrial revolution. So tremendous opportunities. So think about our GDP is energy related. Once you are able to have a much lower cost of energy, which renewable has already proved to much lower than fossil fuel. And emission-free, our energy industry is going to be 10 times bigger or 100 times bigger because almost free energy is there, abundant everywhere, almost free. So then, we are able to shape lots of things. So we can make the desert become forest. Desalination to make a Middle East because you have abundant free energy. So our economy is going to be 10 times bigger. That's something is going to happen. People didn't realize that. So at the same time, this transition, it just started. For developing country or developed country, in terms of net zero transition, they are all developing country. So what we see, the global value chain and the trading route, supply chain, is going to be reorganized. We will clearly see some geopolitical weakness, probably like Indonesia. They have nickels, they have so much renewable energies. Country like Morocco, they could have also tremendous opportunities. So this is just starting. So I think about, everyone has so much opportunities. So I'm very optimistic regarding this coming green industrial revolution.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for leaving us with a hopeful vision of the next 30 years. And let's hope it all comes to pass. Please thank you very, very much to Linnéa, Andrew, and Stefano. Thank you for coming.